Oh, buddy, we're in for a wild ride. Hi, welcome back. It's time. It is the time to be naughty before nice. To be what I am actually at heart, which is a hater. I decided to do something a little different this time. I'm not just going to talk about my 1 stars, the one that I despised, because I had some books that I truly despised this year. I'm going to start with the 2 stars because I have some gripes with a lot of them. A lot of them were like kind of 1.5 stars, and then I'm going to descent, kind of like the circus of hell. I think the most inoffensive one out of all of the 2 stars is the one that I finished most recently, is You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince. I wanted a Christmas rom-com. I wanted a queer Christmas rom-com. What I got was the most insignificant of books. You know when you watched as a kid those Nickelodeon shows where everybody is talking and acting so much out of reality and you're like, haha, so funny, it's a Nickelodeon show. But then you're reading it in book form. It's not written that well to make you believe that these people actually are like in some kind of internal logic reality in which they can behave that way. I kind of despised all of it. Well, despite this wrong, I felt annoyed at everybody at all time. The protagonist is the classic, I am so rich, oh my god, I'm so entitled, but actually deep inside I'm traumatized. I've read it a million times and this was not fresh nor fun. He's outraged at puns because they're directed at him. Like somebody said to him, he's called Matthew Prince, and somebody said, oh, for a prince you're not that charming. And he gets so offended. And then there's, I think he's called Hector, the one that Matthew falls in love with. My dog just returned from his trip. Ciao! Hello! Hector puts dude in every sentence and it gets so grating. And I think the only part that I actually really liked was the third act conflict because it felt like the only moment where people were behaving like humans. Not my favorite Christmas rom-com, possibly my least favorite of all time. Another incredibly insignificant book is Cafè con lychee by Emery Lee. I just did not like this book. There were so many half-baked plots and I think also the author like forgot about half of them. The 2 main characters, so annoying, especially the main character, so entitled, so irritating, and he does not change. That's the problem. You can be irritating and grating in the beginning, but if you don't change from the beginning to the end, there was no character development anywhere. Also the internal logic, again, of what they do. They have to save this restaurant, but they're also enemies, rivals, because they have rivaling restaurants. It was so stupid, so incredibly stupid. Also, the 2 restaurants served such different varieties of food. I have no idea why they were rivals. Everybody was assholes. Like, every character was irritating and made bad decisions from beginning to end. And also, like, the secondary characters were so vapid and stupid. I hated everybody. And then this brings so much like hurt to my heart. An Education in Malice. This was supposed to be sapphic vampires, like Dark Academia sapphic vampires. What I got was the meh of books. This tries to be Dark Academia in the beginning. We are a prestigious college in the 60s, 70s. We're talking about poetry, but then the author forgets and we never get to hear about poetry ever again up until the very end. And the plot starts in the middle of the book. That's the main problem. The actual like intrinsic part of the book, the thing that has to happen for the climax, it happens in the middle of the book. And then you're like, before and after is a snooze fest. Nothing happens. And you're like, well, the relationship between the characters happen, but they're so boring. They're so boring. The naive new student falls in love with Carmilla, which like, a name, a red flag, and Carmilla is in love with their professor, like their poetry professor, and they're all women and somebody is a vampire. Something happens, somebody dies. It sounds awesome when I say it, but it's so boring. And the main, truly the main problem was that the writing does not fit the time period. We're in the 60s, 70s, and the book is written like it's set in the 1200s. like in medieval times. It does not match at all. And sometimes the protagonist like thinks things and you're like, oh my, are we in modern times? What is happening? Oh yeah, we're in the 60s. What? The tone, it was kind of like a whiplash between scenes and you're like, what is happening? I'm going to be very brief about this one. Love Me, because it's an Italian book. You cannot find it in English, I don't think. It comes on Wattpad. That should have been my main red flag. Every stereotypical thing that you can think about Wattpad fanfiction, it's in this book. There's a boarding school, there's a gothic boarding school in California. There's the new kid in town who's not like other girls. Every other girl is vapid and stupid. And she falls in love with the bad boy, but she cannot have him. So she befriends and then dates his best friend who has bipolar disorder. Okay, he's bipolar. The way that mental health was represented in this book, I think is one of the worst that I've ever read, like in my entire life. But it was so entertaining. That's the thing. If a book is bad, but it's entertaining, is it really bad? Yes, this book, yes, it was bad. It was so bad. This was one of the first books that I read this year. I wanted to read more like independently published books, and Mercy by Ian Haramaki was coming like highly anticipated because it was supposed to be the story of a priest falling in love with like this angel-like creature from another culture though, and we are in the 1920s Russian-inspired town, very, very rural. Tell me why this was written as one of those queer books in 2012 when everybody is like, oh my god, I am so gay. Rainbows and sparkles. There were so many historical inaccuracies that me, like a lowly civil engineer, could spot them. Like, we have croissants, we have medicines that shouldn't exist, so bad. And the writing is very bad. We are supposed to be in a rural Russian town in the 20s, and you are a priest falling in love with this mystical creature. Why are you talking like a 13-year-old gay boy? Yes, exactly. It does not make sense at all. Also, the crux of the story is that everybody in the rural Russian town hates the priest because he does not know how to do his work well, and also because he is not his father, because his father died and he took his place, and everybody's like, you're not your father. That does not make any sense. Also, he's very good at his job as a priest. He does not like it, but he's very good. So everybody hates him like with vitriol. And it does not make sense, like, at all. It was not entertaining, and they fall in love in like 20 pages, and it was 2 stars and not 1 star just for the beginning. The beginning was very atmospheric. It was more like 1.5 stars. Another independently published book. This was a novella. It was called Prince of Lust. Here, another priest that summons a demon and they fall in love. They fall in lust. It's called Prince of Lust for a reason, but it's set in Italy. I'm Italian. The historical inaccuracies were multiple, and they were very funny, especially like the Catholicism inaccuracies, which I'm an atheist and I know those things. Like a father and a don and a priest are not the same thing. They're not the same thing. They do not do the same things. Also, the smut was not really good. In my opinion, it was a little bit cringy. But it was a smutty novella. I'm not that evil. You know, it's an independently published smutty novella. Mercy, I went in on that book because it was highly anticipated and everybody was talking about it, even though it's indie publishing. This one, not a lot of people talked about it. Writing needs a lot of maturing. The 2 books that I'm going to talk about. One, well, okay, let's talk about Twisted Games. This is the 2nd book in the Twisted series. You will see, I don't know in which order I'll publish these videos, but the 3rd book was okay, kind of. The 2nd book I'm going to talk about right now, it's a 2-star. The other 2 books are in the pits of hell. I'm going to talk about them later. I read all the Twisted series in a video. I'm going to link it up here. Suffice to say, I did not have a good time. It was so bad. The 2nd book was with the princesses, and I'm like, what? Are we in the Princess Diaries? What is happening? It's a princess and she falls in love with her bodyguard. And I'm like, this is called the Twister series. It's supposed to be like light dark romance. And we are reading about princesses and balls and secret identities. And I'm like, this is so Disney Channel. This would make a fire Disney Channel original movie. And I'm like, the first book was about a fucking stalker, like a millionaire stalker. What is this? It was so ridiculous, and that made it a little bit boring. The first book, so many things happened, but I'm going to talk about that later. But it was boring. It was also hilariously boring, if that's a thing. I don't know, oxymoron, but that's how I felt. The last book in the 2-star category, I'm so sad about it. It's Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. Everybody loves this book. Everybody loves Abby Jimenez except for me. I read that book in I think Pinterest chooses my read, and I was like, this is going to be my book of the year, like book of the summer. This is going to be my new Emily Harry, because everybody told me that it's kind of like Emily Harry. Who lied to me? Who lied to me? Because I don't think there was a single aspect of the book that worked for me aside from the very, very dark plot. So if you don't know, Just for the Summer is not a very happy summer romance. It's a very, very dark story about family abuse masquerading as a summer romance, which is not the fault of the author, but it kind of is, because the tone shift between the two plots not done well. And that brings me to the writing. It's not good. It is very simplistic. It's very tied to the noun, verb, maybe adjective structure, and it's choppy. It's kind of soulless. You never actually know what the characters are feeling from like being subtle and like gestures and expression, because the author tells you, like, the protagonist was sad, she was angry, they were in love. And that's about it. I think it was very, very soulless, very, very sad and dry, and I did not like it at all. I also think that I have no idea why the author constructed the twist of this book. So the twist is, the protagonist reads on a Reddit post in which this guy says, well, everybody who dates me and then dumps me, they find the perfect match afterwards. Like, after me, they find their soulmate. And the protagonist is like, the same thing happened to me, we have to meet. And it's kind of like a meet cute, and the protagonist is a traveling nurse, so she travels to the state where this man is, and it's supposed to be very cute. And then the author completely forgets about this plotline. This is a recurrent theme. Up until the end, like the very end, we know nothing about the protagonist's like pasts, her hookups and dates, and how she discovers this thing. We only know that she has an abusive mother, and that's like the very, very dark thing about the book, because the center of the book is this abusive mother coming back. Aside from the writing, I do not agree with the center message of this book. The center message can be summarized in a sentence that everybody's quoting, which is like, choose empathy. If you can choose empathy. And this is inserted in a conversation where the protagonist is seriously upset and angered by something that her mother did, and she chooses to accept it and then forgives her mother some kind of level, like not all of them, like she's not completely like, oh yeah, you're fine, but she's like, I'm choosing to feel empathy for you because you're very, very mentally ill. And I do not agree. Anger and being upset are emotions that you have to let yourself feel. If you're rightfully feeling them because you've been wronged, then you should be angry. Only then you can begin to like start a process of healing and maybe letting yourself get helped, all of those things. But in the moment, you cannot immediately suppress all of your emotions and choose empathy. That's not how it works, and that's exactly what the protagonist does. She suppresses all of her emotions right in the moment and chooses to be kind towards her mother, even though she's like, I'm not going to forgive you 100%. But it's not healthy at all, and I do not agree, and everybody's enamored by this book, and I'm just not. Exactly. Ladies and gentlemen, the 1 stars. This is going to be a very brief list. I have 4 books. 2 of them you already know what they are if you follow this channel. But let's start with one of the, again, first books that I've read this year. Biggest disappointment of the year is House of Sky and Breath. I had my hopes a little bit up because I read the first book in the Crescent City trilogy, and I kind of liked it. I know. Alice, who are you? Liking Sarah J. Maas? I very, very much disliked every other book that she's written. Throne of Glass? No. 2 stars. The first 2 books in the Court of Thorns and Roses. First book, 1 star. Second book, 2 stars. But then I read Crescent City book 1, and while it was a silly, goofy time and very Sarah J. Maasy, I felt that for once the central message was friendship, and everybody rotated around this friendship between the protagonist and Danica, and I'm like, it was not a healthy friendship, but a friendship nonetheless. It was not romance, it was not love, no gender essentialism on the horizon, and I was like, yeah. And then the second book, and the theme now is romance. Gender essentialist romance with mates and a wet dog fucking character. I fucking hate Hunt. And then I hated the protagonist because she's like, she becomes a totally different person with Hunt, and I despised it. And there were so many plots and so many secondary characters, and it was so boring. Why were you in the plot? You do not belong there. Go away. So yeah, I hated that book. It was so boring and bad, and the smuttier scenes, like the spicy scenes, were so bad. Also, why does Sarah J. Maas put gender essentialism in all of her books? Why do all of her books fucking suck when it comes to representation? We are going in order, so I'm talking about the best and then the worst. So, House of Sky and Breath, the best of the 1 stars, which does not say much. But then we have Twisted Love. First book in the Twisted series. What even happens in this book? He serenades her after stalking her in another country. Like, come on guys, you cannot tell me that you actively like this book. And this is one where I am like in disbelief. It was very entertaining, but objectively badly written. It was the writing was, I would have been ashamed to present this to my teacher. Not only were there grammatical and syntactical mistakes, like the syntax of the sentence was so bad. I wanted to give it 2 stars because it was so fucking funny at the end, but I'm like, you're a fucking stalker. And she's like, there was one scene in which she's like, quit stalking me, I'm in another country, why did you follow me? I'm going to talk to the police. And he's like, well, I'm rich, so you cannot talk to anyone, you just have to forgive me. And she's like, oh my god, and then she forgives him. It was very much like, I'm Chuck Bass. This is the book in the Twister series that got me heated. Like, it was not funny, it was actually really serious. Twister Hate, the 3rd book, the one that everybody loves and everybody told me that it was the best. Who fucking lied to me? This is the worst. This was the worst. And you know why this is the worst? Something really traumatic happens to her. So she's a thief. She's not a kind, immaculate person. But I could appreciate her. Something really traumatic happens to her, and what do you know? He, the main love interest, decides that since she is not being willing to enter a relationship with him, that he should slut shame her in a moment of need. He knows that she has been sexually abused. I'll kill you. Like, I'll push you down a glacier in a volcano. What do you want me to say? What do you want me to say? Fucking hated that book. Hated. For the crowns of the crown, for the worst of the worst. I don't think I've ever read a book that was worse than this. Possibly Grim Reaper Academy from last year. And that's because they tried to rectify incest, and it was a whole ordeal. Apparently it's a theme. I read on a dare, okay? I read Ghosting. My friends were like, haha, so funny, Alice, read this monster romance that has such a funny title. And I'm like, yeah, Okay, that's okay, that's okay. A monster dark romance, okay. What are the trigger warnings, you may ask? And you're like, yeah, the usual. DAPCON, no consensual sex, and sexual abuse. And you're like, yeah, okay. And you get to incest. And you're like, okay, why? But the story is the protagonist's dad, last remaining parent, dies. So she has to come back to their old town and she has to live with her grandma, who fucking hates her. Okay, she hates her. This old woman hates her for no apparent reason. And then the protagonist discovers that the ghost of her uncle still lives in this town, and she is the last in the line of these people who are supposed to be like gravekeepers. She has to do things for some reason. She starts being sexually abused by the ghost of her uncle, who knows that he's her uncle, during the night or at random times in the day, very graphically. Also, like, there's somnophilia, and there's also the fact that she has to become kind of like a vampire, and so she has to do this ritual in which she's like, I'm going to don the vest of my ancestors, and the vest of their ancestors is a bejeweled thong. There's also the fact that her best friend, who is just the only other kid her age in the town, they have the embalmed corpse of her mother in their house, just like posing as her, as if she was alive, and it's never touched again. And then she does this ritual. She kind of becomes a vampire, drinking her own blood. And I'm like, okay. And then she kills her grandma and drinks her blood, and she becomes this very weird creature. And then she gets pregnant from her uncle, which is a ghost. He's a ghost. And then her dad's ghost comes back, and he's like, yeah, sure, marry my brother. I think I've said enough. I think I've said too much, actually. Yeah, these were the bad books that I've read this year. And you're like, Alice, how did you survive? I have no idea. I'll see you next time with the best books of the year. I hope before Christmas. And I have some socials. If you want to connect with me, I have them down below. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye! Mwah.